Hello, everyone. Welcome. On behalf of the City Planning and Urban Affairs program at BU, I want to welcome all of you today to day two of the BU City CoLab week of events. The CoLab is conceived as a collaborative space where our community can come together to discover, learn, and connect. We hope that being part of the CoLab Week's events, you can do just that. All the week's events are free, absolutely fantastic in their own right. And for the students of the program, this is a week where you do not have to attend regular classes. We welcome all of you, students in the program and lifelong learners and beyond, to discover, learn, and connect. Before we introduce our presenter, a few housekeeping things. For this particular event, we welcome you to send your comments and questions anytime during the presentation via the Zoom chat. Andrea will be the moderator during this, so please wait for her guidance. We look forward to this event being as interactive as possible. In fact, our presenter insists on it, and we hope to take questions and have him answer some of your burning questions during this whole time. So, speaking of the presenter, this evening, we are absolutely delighted to host a very valuable presentation that directly relates to succeeding in our professions. David Valecillos, David, please say hello, who is one of our star alumnus.
Hello.
And one of the most versatile, talented, and integrative designers that I know, will be speaking on visual communication for planners, the why and the how. You know what they say, even the best laid plans. Similarly, no matter how great our intentions or plans may be, one of the most important pathways to collaborating and connecting with stakeholders is to be able to communicate your ideas very effectively. David will show you how to do just that and so much more. So, a little bit about David himself, and I say this with great pride because he is a very leading alumnus of our program. So, David is the Director of Design for the North Shore Community Development Corporation. He is an award winning urban planner and real estate developer, a design thinker, and a data driven problem solver. His main focus is on district level real estate planning and development. David is passionate about connecting buildings, people, and public space, and you will see some of his award winning examples where people from all over the world come to visit. David's work ranges from developing multi-million dollar multi-site projects and citywide housing market analysis to planning the initial steps of an innovation district in Barranquilla, Colombia. As Director of Design, David is responsible for overseeing all urban planning projects for the organization, including real estate projects. David is also one of the co-founders, actually the founders, and the director of the Punto Urban Art Museum, established in 2017, which is a social justice public art program in the Point neighborhood. You guys should take a field trip and go see that. It's fantastic. The museum features 85 plus large scale murals and 75 international and local artists. David holds a master's in city planning from Boston University, where he received the award for excellence in graduate studies. He also holds a bachelor's in civil engineering and a certificate in business administration. David currently serves in the Urban Land Institute Boston Chapter Real Estate Committee and Cambridge's Public Art Commission. So If we were all together physically in one room, this would be the time for a resounding applause as we welcome David to the stage. Welcome, David. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Maru. I appreciate it for such a nice words. It's always a pleasure to be here and to share my experience as a BU student, but also as an alumni. And today I'm excited to be here. I know a few of you guys have seen the cameras, as I also teach class BU, and I look forward to it, even though it's going to be a little bit remote because of the times that we're now living in. But I'm gonna go share my screen right now. And again, I would encourage any questions that anyone might have as we move forward through the presentation. I think what I'm trying to do is more to create like a dynamic conversation, share my story, how I got to where I am, and how important visual communication has been for me. And so feel free to share any questions that you might have, and I'll be happy to coordinate. The way I kind of like framed this was to give you like a 10-minute presentation of the work that I have done, how branding, marketing, and visual communication has in a way changed everything that I do since I started my professional career, and then give you some general concepts of design, data gathering, information display, and then kind of leaving the floor for any questions that you guys might have. So Andrea, if you can just confirm me that you can see my screen, that it says visual communications. Okay, great. So a little bit about the why. I always like to talk about the why I do things, or and I find it that I'm interested in companies that talk that way as well, or people that talk in the way of starting a why. And I think my why I work where I work, or what I do, starts from by being born and raised in Venezuela, so a rich country naturally, but over time it decayed, and it is a super high inequality. I grew up there until I was 18. And I was always curious on understanding the intersection of communities, socioeconomic divides, and that had kind of shaped who I am since the beginning. And I think that's one of the main reasons I decided to pursue my master's in city planning. And interestingly enough, right now I still work right at that intersection, but in another country. So having said that, I wanted to share where I work right now is in Salem, Massachusetts. So Salem, as you guys might know, the city of witches, if Halloween Friday, a Saturday, but the city is now shut down during the weekends because of COVID. But anyway, it's the second most visited place in Massachusetts. 1 million visitors a year, most of them during October. And I actually work on this neighborhood that is called Punto Salem, and it's literally 1 block away from the downtown. So the downtown is right here on the left side, and the Point neighborhood is on the right side. And the neighborhood is actually very similar to other neighborhoods in the US. It's actually, it has a story of immigration. It used to be French Canadian in the early 1900s, factory worker neighborhood, blue collar. Fast forward 100 years from when the French Canadians were there. Now it's a mostly Hispanic background community. About 80% of them are from the Dominican Republic. But the interesting thing is that it's a story of segregation. Many of the communities, just like the Point neighborhood, you can think of Boston, Roxbury, and Dorchester. These communities have been segregated and have never truly been integrated into the vibrant core of downtown, even though it's just a couple blocks away. So when the organization that I work for started working in the neighborhood, we thought the organization was kind of like the merge of two older organizations. And we said, why don't we put a vision and action plan where we gather the community and we try to understand what the people want for the community. So we engaged about 300 people. We collaborated with the city, with the neighborhood association and ourselves, and kind of come up with common goals of what we wanted to see in the neighborhood. In the community, I mean, the document is pretty large and comprehensive, but there were 3 common goals. One was to improve the housing infrastructure in the neighborhood. The neighborhood has been neglected of investments, increase affordability. The second one was to improve public infrastructure, parks, sidewalks. They have never been invested over decades. And the last one was to reduce the stigma. So this one was an interesting one because as a community development organization, we knew how to do the first 2, how to bring investment, how to do housing. But we didn't really know how to reduce the stigma. And with that, I mean, what we were hearing was anecdotal evidence that kids, for example, that go to public schools were asking other friends in their classroom to do homework in their apartment, and the parents that live outside of the neighborhood were being told that we're telling the kids like that's not the place that you go by yourself, so you cannot do homework there. And those stories repeat and repeat. But so we didn't know what to do about it, but we put it there. So a little bit of the work that we have been doing there. This is kind of like a typical building before we acquire it. At the moment when we started this plan, we had about 150 units, about 15% of the neighborhood, all of them affordable housing. So we said, we're gonna double the number of units that we own. We're gonna acquire buildings like this ones, the most distressed ones, and we're gonna renovate them, and we're gonna make them affordable. So this is just one example of a renovated building. We open a community space. This is the densest neighborhood in Salem, surprisingly. And a lot of the apartments don't have open space. So if they wanted to throw a birthday party or something like that, there was no such space for that. So we opened this ground floor. We converted it from 2 units to a community space. And we offer classes, like immigration classes, English as a second language classes, yoga, salsa dancing. People can rent it for free for a birthday party, which is like a cleaning fee. We're breaking ground into new construction. This is just a project that is coming up next year for Passive House. I'm happy to talk about that. Andrea, and feel free, if there are any questions about like anything that I'm talking about, feel free to interrupt me and I'm happy to discuss a little more on this. But on that first goal, we kind of like double the number of units that we had. Out of the 300 units that we now own, which is about 30% of the neighborhood, all of it is affordable. We have rehabbed 200 of them, and the last 100 will be rehabilitated in the next 2 years. We have worked with the city to have rehabilitate all the parks. So there are 4 parks. The last one is being rehabilitated next year. We opened this little basketball court that we're very proud of, and it's very colorful, and I'll tell the story behind this one later on. But then we were not really, so all this was going on, and we were not really bridging the community. The people from the neighborhood were not interacting with the people in downtown Salem. And at the same time, the visitors, the economic drive of the city of Salem, which is tourism, they were not really visiting the neighborhood. They were not, the local economy, the local restaurants were not seeing the benefit of that thriving economy in downtown Salem. So that's when we started understanding the power of public art. And what happened with this is that we got a little grant and let me go back. We got a grant in like 2015 to paint 2 crosswalks. And we thought, why don't we paint the crosswalks that no one wanted to cross? So this is literally the divide right here. So we painted this one and we painted there, and we put some music and some food. And now with all the placemaking like boom that has happened in the last year or 2, seems like an easy thing. But in 2015, no one was talking about placemaking the way that they're talking about it right now. So that's the first time that we saw people from the Hispanic neighborhood talking to people in downtown and not really caring about what their socioeconomic background was. so that's when our idea started cooking about what happens if we start using art as a vehicle to bridge the gap. And this is kind of like where the Punto Art Museum comes into life. So, but we didn't just want to make a Punto Art Museum. That's not how it started. We actually went little by little. We worked with the same artist that was doing the crosswalks, and we said, what about if we start bringing a couple of your friends, Hispanic background? We just paint one or two walls. We owned at the moment like about 40 buildings in the neighborhood, and we started installing some murals, and let's see how the community will react to it. And so little by little, we started seeing the community really start embracing this idea of art in unexpected places like alleys and stuff like that. And you will see this throughout the presentation on some of the pictures. But what we wanted to, we really want to create a program that is for the community and by the community. And with that, we said the main goal is to break down the invisible socioeconomic divide that has always existed, kind of like reduce that stigma. But within that, we want to create a foster neighborhood pride, but pride of place. These people are like, they're proud of who they are and what their culture is. But there is a stigma to the place that is attached to many neighborhoods in urban America. So how can we change that? And how can we use art to do that? We wanted to increase economic opportunity for local businesses and at the same time raise consciousness.
David, would you mind if I interrupted you real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Pablo, who I believe is from Salem, has a good question here in regards to what you're talking about, stigma and breaking down social barriers. So he says, how do you view the role of the city in fighting against the stigma of the point? Do you feel there is segregation within the city? He says, I feel like some schools in the area have very disproportionate amounts of diversity, and you can see where Latino students get put in school and where white students go.
Yeah, so, and I think, I mean, we can go an entire 2 hours about this. So I'm trying to be brief, but I appreciate the question because I think that's a key one. There has been systems in place in the US where like redlining, and I'm assuming many of you have heard about this in class, but literally the government in 1930s, as they were trying to put cash outside, like in people's hands because of the crash of the economy in the 1930s, went to the bankers and said, can you come up with a system that I can lend money for people to create wealth? And this is when the mortgage system came to be. And the bank systems got together and said, like, how are we gonna do this system where the government is gonna lend money that it's backed up by them? So they drew maps, and literally they designated the neighborhoods where there were a lot of foreigners or African Americans. They designated as hazardous, long short story, and that's where people didn't lend. So we have maybe 40 or 50 years where loans that were going out in the public were only going to white neighborhoods, and neighborhoods that are classified as D had suffered lack of investment. So this is like what happened to the Point neighborhood in Salem, and it was before French Canadian, but now Dominican. And I will continue talking about it later on about like what's the role of the city, because I think with such old systems in place, even though we have and we call ourselves as progressive, a lot of the things where a lot of people that come to work in cities, they ask, how are things done? And how things are done are based on those systems that have been placed in the past. So has shaped still shape the current state of these neighborhoods. So fast forward 4 years since the first mural, we have now 95 large-scale murals. We have collaborated with about 75 artists from all over the world, mostly from Hispanic background. We wanted to create art that was also representative of the community. Like, for example, on the top left, that's a portrait of one of the community members. On the top right, we have a Dominican artist that did the farmer. On the bottom left, like for example, that was a participatory installation where the artists collaborated with all the kids on the block, and they drew elements that they wanted to see in there, and then that's why it's called Storming the Court. And you see all kinds of elements, and that was all designed by the kids, and then the artists kind of like curated it. We also have a collaboration of local and international artists. We learned that through doing a lot of research before we installed the program, that you wanted to have a balance because otherwise the local artists don't have space to express themselves. We throw a block party, then how you start creating. The party is all about like Dominican heritage, salsa dancing, Dominican food, etc. We do educational tours on redlining and racism and art. So before COVID, we used to tour about 1,000 kids every year from the public school system. So what happens after all this art got in place and all those rehab? It has been interesting. It has been transformational. I don't think anyone in the organization actually expected the impact and the positive impact that this has had. Like, I mean, hundreds of thousands of people have positively heard now about the Point neighborhood, where before it was carrying the stigma, right? For example, we have been on national TV, we have been on PBS. The tourist agency of the city of Salem put us on as a top 3 destinations on all their flyers and brochures. They go to all bed and breakfasts, like 400,000 brochures that go out. Lonely Planet, I don't know if anyone knows, but like when you go into Lonely Planet on internet, we're like #1 destination for Salem, above the witches, above the museum. So like, to think of a neighborhood that no one ever wanted to come in Salem, like literally when I started working there, no one wanted to like come here. Like now it's a tourist destination. It's above the witches, it's about all of our museums. It's pretty impressive. So it's very funny, like looking back now. There is a cultural resiliency, and this goes with like visual communications and branding and like responsibility, where when we were thinking of, okay, how do we tackle the stigma? A lot of city officials, for example, they were like, oh, what happens if we rebrand the name, right? You know, this is the south side of Lafayette Street. Why don't we remember like Lower Lafayette Street, you know, like the Lola neighborhood? And everyone in the neighborhood was calling this neighborhood El Punto. This is the Point neighborhood, right? So we said, like, what about if we put El Punto right at the beginning of the name? So everyone who's gonna come and check the art, they're like learning that this is a Spanish-speaking neighborhood. We have anecdotal and quantitative evidence that people really like the murals, and they're now proud of where they live. Like, for example, kids that now go to school, we have spoken to teachers that they even reference where they live, not based on the street name or the street address, but what the mural, like the mural that is on their building. So, oh, I live on the Hummingbird, or I live on the dog. Which is pretty interesting. In terms of economic development, as I mentioned, now the neighborhood has featured all over, even like airline magazines that feature Salem. They put us in there. Like small business and starting to see an increase in revenue. Like I mentioned, Lonely Planet now features a #1 in Salem and #5 in Massachusetts. So it's so funny to be like next to like Fenway and Harvard Yard, and it's like it's unreal. Anyway, but so I started working on the organization as a real estate developer mostly, but I was really always focused on design and learning about design skills and visual communication. And as the art was happening, was like maybe 4 of us that was like championing the creation of the Punto Urban Art Museum. I really stepped up and took the leadership on like what the museum image will be, like on the name, but then also we had like a branding issue where the museum started becoming like the most visual aspect of our work, but like whoever was the visitor was not associating the murals to like the organization itself, which is like all the groundwork, right? Like this, I don't think this project would have been as successful as it is if the foundation of affordable housing, parks investment, sidewalks and stuff like that wasn't there. And so I took up on rebranding the organization and aligning it to the museum. So we redesigned the web pages, and the whole organization has suffered a positive transformation. We went from being a $2 million organization to a $3 million. I mean, not only, of course, the art, but then other programs have contributed to the positive growth. But the art has also shaped our relationship with lenders on real estate. Like the whole package have just changed the way people think of the organization as not just like, oh, as a housing developer, but also like this cool, innovative, amazing branding that now they trust and believe in the model that we have put here in place. So I guess now getting to why we're here, and so why is this so important is that we as urban planners or working in the urban environment, we're usually dealing with very important issues that sometimes, because of the nature of the way our cities or policies work, become, or people have made very boring. And so how do we simplify it and enough to create attention and maybe people understand what we're talking about? So if I think of why I think it's very important, the work that we're doing as urban planners and people working in the urban environment are very complex topics that dictate literally years and years ahead of when decisions are being made. And then also time, like as we have a new generation that is completely addicted to technology, the span of attention is very, very short. So we want to be brief, but we want to be concrete, and we want to be efficient about how do we get that message across. Otherwise, we lose people's attention, especially on public meetings and stuff like that. So how do we do this? In my head, and as I'm going to explain more a little bit about this, but it's like we have to set a set of regulations within ourselves about clarity, consistency, and hierarchy, and making sure that the main goal or the main information that we really want to come across comes across, and how do we curate that? And so hopefully as I'm talking right now, I'm going to give you a little bit of guidelines around that. And I know that you guys have a kind of like an electronic portfolio presentation later on, but this kind of walks through the main aspects of what visual communications are. So getting across who you are and what do you want to do. This can be applied for a portfolio, but for any project that you're doing. And I'm happy to see if anyone wants to comment right now, and I will give a 30 seconds. But as an urban planner or as someone working maybe into in many different fields, maybe, what are some of the main challenges that people struggle when selling their work, or when selling their work, selling their ideas, selling their project? Like, what do you think are one of those? Yeah, what are those some of those big challenges? For me, for example, as a civil, like I didn't have a unified story, and so I needed to go back and think about who I was and what is it that I do, and explain that very clearly. In projects, when I'm working about housing, it's a lot about storytelling and what is the most powerful story. So getting to that storytelling it's very hard for me. So I was thinking, I don't know if Andrea, there's some people sharing what that is, and hopefully I will address it as I go through.
Gottlieb said money was his was the challenge.
But what does that mean by money?
Vanessa saying inequality.
Inequality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully, as we move forward, I'll be able to. So, thinking through the lenses of a portfolio, there are like three main components, right? There's you and what you do. Then there's what you want to do for work. And then there is like who can pay you to do what you love, right? And I've always think of those three items, and I kind of started from, so there's you, there's your past projects. So if we start from left to right, there's your life experiences, your skills, your language, your education, your work experience. Then there is the people who, employers, your clients, the clients, the grants, that they have past projects, practice areas, their mission, their values, future projects. And that is what you want to do for work. And as urban planners, I'm thinking of it as urban planners, mostly like either real estate development, community planning, transportation planning, policy making, etc. So as I was putting all this together, and many times still put it together about either like I'm applying for a grant or I'm pitching it to a client or whoever it is, when I lay this out, before I used to think that I had to start from the left, on like, oh, who I was or who I am. It actually helped. Well, what is it like? What is it that I want to do for? What is it that I love, or why am I doing it? And starting with the why. So if on a portfolio example, I want to start from the real estate development, it's like, okay, I want to do real estate development. So who are the best employers, grant awards organizations that offer grants about real estate research? Who are those people? And so if I'm working from right to left, then what is their practice areas? What are their past projects? What's their mission? What's their values? Where is the company or the organization going? And how do I align to them? So I started researching, I encourage researching those organizations, those companies, and what is that they look for? You know, what do they do? When you're working in urban planning, a lot of those documents are public, and I will share a couple of examples later on about how you can research companies that you might like. And then after you know what they do or what they fund, then you tie your skills, your experiences, your past, and you can hopefully align yourself or work towards aligning yourself to get to that grant or that organization or that employer, so that hopefully you're doing what you love. So when you should be thinking about doing a portfolio.
There is a question. I hope you don't mind.
No, of course.
Pablo, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm like really excited because I am from Salem, and like I went to the Salem public schools, and like I've seen the change of the city. I even like worked at like the YMCA after school program and got to see like all the different changes from a social aspect. I guess like my question is, because Salem has changed a lot in the 10 years, what like other participants or like local nonprofits have you seen as like important in the growth of Salem, as well as like the role of like the local university expanding into the point, as you've seen like with them kind of buying like some lots and kind of participating? Do you see like that in itself has also created some change for like that neighborhood as well? And do you see like any issues that like integration might cause for like the people living in the point?
So I think the booming economy of the US in the last 10 years, and especially on real estate, has caused pressures. We're lucky that lucky, but I think that stigma even plays out on that pressure, that we haven't seen that pressure because of that stigma. Like usually the point neighborhood is maybe 10, 20%, if not more, in terms of rent or condo costs. But as you know, in Salem, downtown is booming. There's so many now projects going off the ground, and there is a ripple effect. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It's just more how you manage it, right? And we have been lucky enough that we had a vision and action plan in 2013 when the economy was not booming as it was like a year ago. And we were able to acquire a lot of property before that. So we were able to manage kind of like that impact the best we could. And that's one thing that we think of neighborhoods as like organic systems, that there is never an end and a beginning. It's always changing. So how do we adapt ourselves to better suit our programs and services as best as we can, depending on the needs of the neighborhood? And I don't know if that answered your question, but what other nonprofits that have played a key role? Like we run a youth development program called Youth Build. Then there is like Root, Salem State kind of have played out a big role. And then the city is supportive of the work that we do. So they definitely have shaped a lot of the work that we do. They have always been great supporters of what we do. I don't think you can achieve true neighborhood ruralization without a lot of players moving on the same direction, which I think that's what the Vision and Action Plan did. And I'll be happy to talk a little more about that on the end. But when I say, when do you start thinking about your portfolio or how you talk about yourself, it's now. Like you got to start right away. If you're like a first year, or if you're a senior, or if you're a second year, don't wait until the end, because then it's too late, unless you want to spend like 3 months of your lives organizing all your projects. So think of like, okay, sometimes you might don't have the answers of what do I want to work. That's maybe why you're taking your master's, but start thinking about like, you have a final project, right? So you want to get an A, or you want to get the best grade that you want. But how do I organize that in a way that it becomes part of a portfolio? So how do I summarize it in 2 or 3 pages that then, if I have 3 classes this semester, then I have 3 samples of work that I can show also to an organization, or samples of work to a grant that I want to get, or a scholarship that I want to get, whatever it is. But think of it as also, so think of it now. Don't think later, because then that's going to be too late and there's going to be a lot of work. I'm telling you from experience. So as you're thinking of these things, there's one key, there's these 4 key things that it's called, like, it's like a branding guide, and every good company will have a branding guide that people follow and that is simple to follow. Otherwise it will be a mess and people don't associate. But this then, if you stop thinking about organization or companies, like who you are. And so there goes color and text, formatting, the general content that you want to show, and what is the layout of that information. But in terms of color and text, that's what I'm talking about, the branding guide. And within that color and text or branding guide, there is a color palette, there's a font style, and then there's a hierarchy. And I'm just going to show you a sample of, like, in very simple, like in a 1-pager, I'm just going to show you like kind of like what I did for North Shore CDC. So as we were aligning our branding between North Shore CDC and the Punto Art Museum, we needed to get everyone in the organization speaking the same language through the brand. So choosing a font, and that is going to remain consistent on every document that you produce. So primary font, Century Gothic, Helvetica Neo. The logo, I mean, you can go in a lot of detail about like how the logo should be sized and everything. I'm just showing, like, you just use it in magenta or in white only. You don't use it in black or in other ones. When you're using your Word documents, then you start creating a hierarchy. And that hierarchy, what allows is that it provides kind of like a roadmap of what information is more important. So the bigger the text is, or the darker it is, that's where the eye will go. So you're training your audience on where should they read first. And that's kind of like what I was trying to do here with Title 1, Title 2, Title 3, paragraph. And as you see, it's increasing in size, but it's also increasing in color. And then there is a color palette. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to avoid think of this branding guide as a training for your audience. And when I'm saying training, is the eye. Like, where should the eye go first? And so, for example, with keeping this primary palette super simple, what I try to do was create one color that becomes super attractive, that's where your main information goes. And then you degrade the black and then makes it very simple. The challenge for me is that, like, I didn't want to pick different colors because a lot of people are not experts, or not experts, but are not so familiar with color palettes. So you try to simplify it as much as possible. I always say in times of doubt, go simple. And I think it should apply for a lot of people. So then in terms of formatting, if you're thinking of a portfolio, you can think of, yes, I mean, right now in COVID, talking about hard copies sounds kind of ridiculous because no one is meeting in person, but is it going to be online? Is it going to be a hard copy? Is it going to be a PDF? Is it going to be a virtual magazine? So how are you going to present your information? That's going to determine how you organize your projects when you're presenting them on your final, or afterwards, if you spend a week or two on like just summarizing them. What's the orientation? So for example, if it's a hard copy, do you want it to be landscape? Do you want it to be portrait? And then you want to keep those things consistent. So what you're trying to create right now, it's like a Bible that is going to dictate how you organize all your projects moving forward. And then the flow. And with the flow, I think it's more like, what's the storytelling for most projects? And like, for example, usually what I like to see on portfolios or projects that people like come and interview, it's like, what are you solving? And what do you solve? Or if it was a group effort, what is it that you did? And how, and then you tell how you solve it. But I usually open with either a summary or what the problem was. In terms of general content, and this applies also for either a web page or whatever it is, but in terms of a hard copy portfolio, you will have your cover, you'll have your contact information. So on your cover, you want to make sure that you have your email, you have your phone number, your LinkedIn. The contact information, actually, I encourage to keep it in almost every page, maybe like super small center at the very bottom, so that in case, I don't know, you know, someone print, like imagine you send your portfolio or your sample of work to some people and then they hit print and only one page prints out, at least the contact information is going to be there too, but very subtle. If you're creating that portfolio, then you want your bio, kind of like your resume. You want an index or like a table of contents of the different kind of work that you're offering. And then of course you want your project summary, and then how you structure that will vary on what your skills are. And then the layout, and I think I will show a sample here, but you want to make sure that the flow is good, but then also the layout becomes consistent. So again, what I was sharing before is that you're training the eye of the reader. And so you want to make sure that your layout is consistent. So whenever you're talking about your project summary, maybe the summary of the project, like the first paragraph that is a short summary, it's always in one location. And I will show a sample later, but the statistical facts or something like that are always in one location, and the conclusion is always. So if someone is looking through different projects, they know where the information is located. It's not like they're wasting their time about like, oh, where is it here or is it there? So that's one of the main things. So with that, I will show you, let me show you, I put, yeah, here. So this was, I mean, a portfolio I put a long time ago, but that's the cover. You have like your table of contents. You kind of like tell them who you are and what kind of projects you're doing. This is kind of like your summary of your resume, but better looking. But I think this is more important. So the way that I structure my projects was 4 pages. On the first one, I tell them the year that I did it. Then I'll tell them the title, of course, who was the client or who I was working for. What did I do there? And then there's just a little summary of what the project was about. And then the other next 2 pages, it just explains the project in more detail. And usually it goes from like the development process or something like that. It starts always from left to right, right? Like, I mean, human brain works always, or traditionally, depending on the culture, but here in America, it starts from left to right. And so you want to make sure that you start your main problem, like, so the way I structure it was like, what problems am I solving on the left side, and then how I solve it. So usually the conclusion comes at the end. So if you keep going, you know that right there, you're starting a new project. So you kind of are training the eye of the user, saying like, okay, here's another project. Here's like the year, the title, the client, what did I do? And then it's like, okay, what was the issue? And then what is the solution? And then if you keep moving forward, it's kind of the same thing. So 2014, the client, skills, the little summary, and then how do you solve the issue? And this is kind of the same thing. So the problem and the solution. Questions so far? Anyone, Andrea, anywhere? No? Okay. So here's just another example. This is not mine. Actually, let me just show you. This one I liked. So this one did, this ones were some artists from Spain that were pitching us we're about to work on a school in the Point neighborhood. And we told them the whole spiel about like who we are and where we're working. And they're like, their team is very interesting because one, it's an urban planner, another one is an architect, another one is a graphic designer, and another one is a fine arts person. And their name is Mistura. So they open with a why, or like a quote from E. Cummings on about to become yourself. So I thought it was very powerful because they didn't tell me what they were pitching, but they just opened with that quote. It says, to be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle, which any human being can fight, never stop fighting. And this was gonna go on a school. So they said, what is the design proposal? And if you can see, it's like a new section. So full page, full of color, become who you are. And that's what the message is about and why they chose become who you are. And then they said, okay, we're gonna blow all this up in one building, and some renderings, but you're seeing consistency of like, what section is this? This is the proposal section, and this is the subtitle of that section. Keeps it constant, so you knowing what section you are. Again, same section. Proposals, become who you are, just different colors. So another one again. All of a sudden, full blown up page with color, you know it's a new section. So previous experience, super simple, title in the middle. So this was interesting. So this becomes almost every project that they do. So you can right away, what is the first thing that you notice? Of course, a beautiful picture in the right side, of course, they're artists. But then the next thing that you notice is the title on the left, on the top left. So bigger size, you start seeing the hierarchy of the text, right? Different color catches the eye right away. Bold letter, and it takes a bigger space than anything else. Then you can tell that the paragraphs is in a light gray, it's not black. Usually when you do that, it's very important because the black with the white contrasts a lot. So usually if you put black with white, then it flashes out a lot. But if you start using a light gray, your other letters become more relevant. And that's when your hierarchy becomes more prominent. And so the way that you start organizing information makes it easier for the eye. That's when your message starts becoming more clear. So they're giving you a bold here and a darker gray. So in a way, if I only have, let's say, 30 seconds to read this, I look at the pictures, I look at the phrase, which is life in movement, and then I will probably skip the paragraphs and I will just read the bold letters here. And what does that mean? And that should be your main message. So another great picture, beautiful, I get it. Another one, and then you know there's another project coming up. So great thing, consistency, right? So the text hierarchy is the same thing. Top left, bold letter, blue, different than anything else. Then your paragraph is in gray. And then beautiful pictures. So even the layout, you can start noticing, excuse me, that and I believe, let me see, hopefully I hadn't tested this, but almost the layout of the space of the page is, I will say maybe 2/3 is taken by the picture, and then 1/3 is taken for text. So when you use the Nets project, it's all about consistency. So those 2/3 are being occupied by a picture, the other third is being occupied by a text. Those are little things, and I'm hoping that if we can share after this presentation is over and stuff like that, I will send a link to a couple of tutorials free on YouTube that they seem silly as I speak right now, but once you start using them and once you start paying attention to all the documents that you read that are professionally made, you start getting it. And the job is to make the reader's job easier. You don't want them wandering around what kind of message you're saying. No, everything is organized. And here's where the most important information is. Here's where the title is. Move on. We value your time. And that's what you want to say, what you want to do. So other pictures, oops. And then all of a sudden again, so just keep it consistent. Title, there's nothing to highlight there, but you get the message. Another section, who we are, right? So you know it's a new section, you keep it consistent, same position, same size of font, and the little line below that. And so here, again, kind of follows the same format as you can see. 2/3 of the page is a picture, beautiful, of course, they're artists. On the left side, you have the text. They have the title here saying hello, and then they're talking about who they are. In bold, a little bold, they're highlighting their names, who their teams are, where the gallery is. And then you know that the section kind of like changed because of the layout, so our achievements and who have they worked with. So they keep consistent the lines on the side, but then also like that, title. So if you can tell, they use bigger fonts on the tops than on this one, right? So that's just a little bit of a hint that like, hey, this information is more important than going this one. If you all of a sudden have this one be bigger than this one, then your eye might go there instead of, so just thinking about it. And if you see the layout, it's almost the same, where they're almost dividing on 3 spaces. So when you go, like maybe this line is almost the same. You see the one that divides the space between the text and the other 2 columns. So anyway, at the end, thanks, contact information. If you want to reach out to us, it's right there. Let me show you. And then another sample. And this is a project. I mean, this is, again, another, as I was looking for examples. Interesting, what I like is that they use black and white photos at the very bottom, so the blue becomes very prominent. But as you open it, again, the pictures remain consistent. The text is what becomes prominent. But here you can start telling the hierarchies. So titles, bold, black, and then they start making, in terms of text hierarchy, they have these pop-ups in different colors. So that's kind of interesting, but you start seeing the palette, right? Black, white, grays, and then every now and then the blue just to pop it. Kind of like what I told you that I was doing with the organization with magenta, that if I have the, like when I'm doing reports and stuff like that, I can use that magenta colors to like start popping some information every now and then. Let's see. So here is what is interesting, kind of like where you have the cover, and I believe this is the beginning of the section, of a new section. So street safety and senior citizens. So if you move forward, there should be something about that. Then alternative spaces for youth education, and it keeps constant. So all your pictures are in black and white, and it just keeps you, kind of what I did with my portfolio, where I had a background picture and then the year where I was doing it. So 2014, 2015, and then I had a main title in blue. The interesting part here, you can see is that they used, again, that's just my recommendation of like using paragraphs with grays instead of blacks, because it just gives you a level of hierarchy that makes it easier for the eye. And then you have these blues that pop up. So if I always go through the exercise as I'm reviewing so now, and I didn't mention this, but now I oversee marketing, branding for the organization, and of course, the arts and design team. So if I'm reviewing like a document that is going to go out there, my first thing is like, where does my eye go first? And so if it goes to too many places, then I send it back and I send a comment like, okay, my eye is going here and it's going there. What is the most important information that you want to convey? And whatever that answer is, then make it pop up more than the other one or lower the volume of the other one. So here, I mean, and these are not perfect examples, but like this one in the eye, yes, it captures that I'm on the first section. There's a subtitle there, but then this one's kind of fight for each other. But this one has a little more relevance for you because it kind of pops out of the normal structure that they have. Let's see. And then sometimes I believe like colors get in the way, but like the blues always pop up, right? The top sections, 2, 3 sections, so you'll know in what section you are. And then they keep it consistent, right? Where they will have like your main paragraphs are always here. And then, I mean, of course, in that one, they have a table, but you have your main paragraph here and some pop-up information and the main title here. Questions on like layout, structure. I know I threw out a lot there, so I am happy. And I will share again my screen to show you something else. But I would love to just open it up to some questions that people maybe are interested in or something that they're struggling with as they're thinking about their portfolio or as they're looking for jobs. Any questions? And if not, I'm happy to, of course, keep you showing stuff, but please.
So David, when should they start working on their portfolios?
Now.
Now, when did you start working on yours?
I learned my lesson. I started working on it after I finished my master's, and
I remember that, David.
Huh?
I remember that.
You know, I never thought it was so important, and then anyway, there was some light at the end of the tunnel that like I was like, oh my God, I need to do this. And I pushed myself and I was like road tripping Europe for like 2 months celebrating graduation. And then I was like, okay, then I'm gonna go back to work. And I was like, I need to learn the skills. And it was about like 2015, I started like reading about it. But then it became such an important part of who I was. And then knowing that what is most important, I think, is that I think as an urban planner, maybe you come from a design background and that's fine. But a lot of the times like civil engineers, like English majors, like you have a different set of skills. But then explaining visual communication and being very clear about it and displaying that makes you unique because you already have those other skills. So adding this might just open you that opportunity because no one can pitch that project better than you just because you know how to do the skill. Like, and then it opens you opens you the door to the room of where the decision makers are. And that's when you start having a voice. So that's why I encourage you so high to read about design, about text hierarchy, and I will send those links to you, Andrea, later tonight. I made everyone that I work with at our organization watch those videos. And then we discuss what they think. And then we go through all those questions and why it's so important.
So we got a few questions rolling in. What are some common mistakes you've seen people make on their portfolios?
What I think is like they do not appreciate, like they don't, and it's funny, they don't appreciate the value of detail. Like for example, there has many times I go and I have talked to people about this, what I just talked about, and text hierarchy and color palettes. And they're like, oh, that's a little thing. I know how to do it. It looks so simple. And then a year afterwards, they come to me and I'm like, oh my God, I struggled so much for a year. And then I started learning a little more and they're like, now I get it. So for some reason, it's like people look at it and the thing is like, you know, there's a quote says, good design is simple. And So it goes unnoticed, but that's what good design is about. And so you want to make your papers as clean as possible. If it looks too, so then all of a sudden you're trying to make things too complicated and everything is popping and everything is flashy. And it's like, no, because then your eyes go, like your reader go everywhere. You want to be super simple. Otherwise it just gets too messy and too complicated and your message doesn't come across.
So so how many projects should we present in our portfolio? Like, what's a good
Yeah,
range?
so I had, I mean, I think they vary because I don't think you want to sell yourself short if you have a lot, but you want to choose your top ones, right? So if you have a 1 hour interview, the great thing that the portfolio does is that it will not dominate, but it will guide your interview. You will have your chit chat, it's nice and stuff like that. But then all of a sudden, I'm going to ask, oh, you have a portfolio with you. Let me see it. And I'm going to start going page by page. So at that moment, who designed that portfolio, it's owning the narrative of what we're going to be talking during the interview. Because I'm going to go page by page, and someone curated that portfolio. So what is the first project that you want me to see? So if I do real estate, you want to open up with your real. You don't want to tell me, oh, you have to go through the page, like the halfway through the document just to get to your real estate, because then I'm like, well, what's the first half for then? You know, how do you start shaping your portfolio so that it best suits that that organization that you're hoping to work with, right? If it's a PDF, like which projects do you send first, right? Like the most important thing is how do you save them time? So anyway, think of like, I would say no more than 6 maybe, but then again, if you have 10, it never hurts to just add them at the end and then you just walk through the first set, you know, like, I mean, maybe you, of course, you want to show up with a 40-page document, but think of it as in like, if you have 1 hour, how many projects can I show in 30, 40 minutes and leaving minutes for questions and answers? Like sometimes I'm going to be like, hey, you have a presentation. Oh my God, you're prepared more than anyone else. So that just showed me that you're super passionate about it. So
what software do you use to make your portfolio?
That's the challenge. I think I have heard from other people that Canvas is a great tool to do branding and to pitch.
People without
to
design
organize.
skills.
Yes, exactly. I think if you are very good at PowerPoint, you can make very good presentations in PowerPoint.
David, I second that. I mean, people don't even understand that some of the visuals I make all in PowerPoint.
Yeah, but I mean, but it takes a little bit of learning. So
exactly, but still easy because the learning curve. And guys, Canva is like the gold standard for folks who are not initially designers. It has templates for everything.
Yeah, so
Canva is the best.
Canvas was not there. So I learned in design and I went to the very core. I really wanted to understand palettes and stuff like that. So I went through the whole thing, and it took time and it took practice and it was tedious, but there are other options out there. One thing that is important, I think, for urban planners especially, and I mean, I'm assuming for other people too, like that, like as a civil engineer or architects and stuff like that, is that you're going to start seeing the interaction of different softwares. Some softwares are going to be good for some things. Some softwares are going to be for another one. Like, for example, GIS. And I think actually GIS just came up with a, partnership with Illustrator, but it just came out this past year, where they realized GIS is not good for graphics. It's great for analysis and doing the colors. So what I was doing, I was like exporting the base maps, and then the icons, I will put them on InDesign or something like that, or Illustrator, and then the maps will look better. So as you're learning, you can go as extensive as you want, or you can go as simple as you can, but there is a plethora of options there that it's about going and pushing yourself and not being afraid to fail.
I think this is a good question from Alejandra. She says, how do you recommend finding your style? I think that's a good, like, what you think, what's your aesthetic? is going to be. I think that's a tough thing.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all about how much you want to go dive into it. But I started getting into, so there are two ways to approach this. One is like, do you want to appeal to the company that you want to work for, or the organization that you're applying for, or the grant? So if they're classy and they're black and white and stuff like that, maybe you don't want to come as too crazy. So they use their colors. But then if you're talking about yourself, I mean, my portfolio, I think right now I will change the colors. That was a little, like, it's a little older, but for example, when we chose magenta for the Punto Art Museum in Orchard CDC, we wanted a color that was fun, that was popping, that you couldn't ignore. We were trying to make a statement about, we're here and you cannot miss us. Before, you were ignoring us, but we're gonna pop magenta everywhere and you're not gonna be able to ignore this anymore. So that's kind of like how we chose magenta. But then as I was thinking more of like myself, like there is color psychologies, right? And what color means. So if you're very passionate about developing your identity and like maybe you want to become a freelancer or your own company or whatever, like for example, blacks and dark blues talk to about like integrity and consistency and professionalism, while like magenta and orange, or it's more creative and fun, and so it all depends on what message you want to come across, and that's when it goes with color psychology and what kind of colors you want to pick. But there's a lot behind that, and I kind of love that because it's the subliminal message that you're sending, right? If all of a sudden you're opening up with like a super colorful icon that pops up different colors, you're telling them I am fun. If you're maybe going for a real estate that is super conservative and stuff like that, maybe you want to choose black and dark blues and stuff like that. So it's like, hey, I'll be doing what you do and I'm good at numbers and I'm not going to go too crazy, so those are fun things to play around with.
So Medusa, she has a comment to add.
Because I think it's a great question. And I think, David really went into the details of how to get to it. And I was trying to think about, when I actually also worked as a graphic designer once upon a time. And one of the things to kind of, understand your style, we look at magazines, we look at clothes, we look at so many things around us. And you will see again and again that there are some things, some colors, some ideas, some formats, some design sensitivities that grab you. So for me, I think, Apple has been a great inspiration because the design of it, right from how you visualize to how you use, there is a consistency that David so rightly pointed out. So look at a lot of these things, look at what's out there, but don't just choose something because it's the flavor of the day. It should be something that you gravitate to again and again. And then when you do ask yourself, is this me? And the other thing is that you always have to do like a time check, meaning that is this the things I liked then, is it dated now? Because one of the worst things you can do is create the most beautiful graphic design, but then it's dated because that will not connect you to the maximum number of people. So these two things I just wanted to add, because I think it is very important for us to observe, and then really start with the most simple things first. Right, David?
Yeah,
We have a thing to overcrowd and make it, if it's not complicated enough, it's not good enough,
I couldn't agree more. And I think, just to add with Maru said, taking pictures, and I think the more is, I mean, of course, it comes from a biased perspective because I love the topic, but I came to love it. I wasn't a person that was like, oh my God, the design is my thing. No, I was just, it's like part of nature of who we are to like learn about it and like become a fan of good design. And I think after you start learning, it becomes almost like a philosophy where you go around and you're like, oh my God, this is good design. You take a picture of it and then you start analyzing, well, why is that good? And it becomes for lamps, for anything. It could be fonts, it could be names, logos, it becomes like a problem solving thing, because once you start looking at things from a simplistic point of view of like, what am I trying to achieve? Then you're getting to the very core of it. And then it doesn't matter like if you're a graphic designer or not, you just go for simplicity and it just achieves what you want. So if, of course, then you want to become a professional, then you can of course do it. But it like kind of like with the magenta thing, it's like what we're trying to achieve, well, we want it to pop, we don't want to be ignored. So let's just put something that no one can ignore. Even like, for example, when we're coming up with a name, when we were putting like murals and stuff like that, we're like, oh, this is going to be an arts district. And then we were starting talking to artists and stuff like that. And one of them came and said, well, I mean, if you put like 4 large-scale murals in a city, that's kind of cool. But if you put like 20 in like 2 blocks, that's almost like a museum. We're like, interesting. And we were like, okay, what happens if we, instead, like art district, you go everywhere across the US and everyone, oh my God, I have an arts district and there's like 3 statues and that's it. Or I mean, there are bigger ones, of course. But we're like, but no one has a Punto, like an urban arts museum, like an open air museum. We're like, okay, let's play with that idea. And then can we start challenging? And in a way, that kind of start forcing us, like creating our own branding and challenging the status quo, not only of low income neighborhoods, but also of museums. Museums are so like hierarchical, right? Of like, oh my God, they're like the best design architect, they're so cool. And like, but they're always like super exclusive. And it's like, how can you democratize art, right? And then there's a whole spiel that I can spend an hour talking about it, but playing with the stigma part and kind of like we have this theory of self-perpetuating prophecies where museums are designed by the best architects. Once you go in there, you feel cool because there's a bunch of art that is designed by like the best artists. And then you walk out of there and you're like, oh, this is cool. I feel good. I feel educated and like, you know, super nice and super cool. But then with low-income neighborhoods and housing, and especially affordable housing and projects, for example, there's a stigma to it. So almost at the self-perpetuating prophecy is the opposite, where the stigma goes from the neighborhood, the concentrated projects, affordable housing, and then it's transferring to the individual. And that's what I was calling about the pride of place. So so what happens if you start mixing the museum part with a low-income housing, low-income neighborhood, and try to bring the best of both, right? And then democratize art and stuff like that. And that's kind of like the intersection that we're kind of working. But anyway, it goes to branding and stuff like that. So it all kind of ties together and it becomes a philosophy once you start getting to the core of it. So that's why I guess I wanted to share a little more of that. Once you start thinking into it, it influences all the work that you do.
Lorena, just got her hand raised. Do you want to ask David a question?
And then I think Connie had a question as well. And that probably should be the last one for the evening. Right, Andrea?
Well, we have a little more
we have time?
Yeah.
You're the one who organizes, I don't know. Okay, great. Sorry.
Okay. I'm glad I got to swoop in just before the end. David, thank you so much for everything that you're sharing and questions around like art and placemaking, and especially switching up, especially in a city like Boston, even a state like Massachusetts, where so many public art spaces are so unaffordable. The museums are just very expensive. So not only is it like a democratizing for like what gets to be art, but also, you know, how you can literally just walk out and it's right there. I personally struggle with the accessibility of creating art spaces and the ramifications of gentrification. And I was wondering how you sort of tied that in very consciously into the work you're doing. And specifically, if you ever considered, say, cooperative housing structures for the renters, or with the new builds, how you are defining affordability, and whether that medium area income, because El Punto is so close to downtown, which is so much more expensive, how that maybe skews the medium income, and then how that then skews affordability in these units.
I appreciate your question, and I think as urban planners, it's such a thing to have right on your mind. So there was a lot there, and I'm going to try to decompartmentalize it and answer as many as I remember. But So one thing that we were lucky enough is that we didn't think of the art as a way to like, oh my God, that is change. It was more like, we didn't know it was going to be art. You know, we started with housing, we started building the foundation of affordability. We have gotten to like 30% affordable. If you look at the, and unfortunately I didn't show the map because today was more of a visual, but we have a map of like all the properties that we own. And the first 2 blocks, that's where we put most of our art that are next to downtown. We own every building on those 2 blocks, but like 1 building. So we kind of like created a shield, and that's kind of like where we were like, that's what our strategy is. And we have seen that so far it has worked. That's one thing that we keep in mind, that we have always got to be constantly hearing what's happening in the community. And so there is always those macroeconomic forces, micro and macroeconomic forces of art, placemaking, gentrification, rents, and then affordability. At the same time, as an urban planner, one of the things that happen in the US is that you have these segregated neighborhoods, right? That property values decreased. And then you start looking at things like about, for example, like how those public schools get financed. And usually those get financed through property taxes. So if you have lower property taxes values and less resources that you have on the public educational system for the people that live there. So do we want to keep and segregated neighborhoods the way they are and just keep them affordable, or that like, can we find a balance? And I think it's kind of like disrupting this system that we live in that have segregated communities for a long time. And how do we do that? And I don't think, if there is an example there of in the US that has been done, I'll be happy to learn, but so far I have not. And so that's, I guess, kind of like where we are, and we clearly screwed up somewhere along the line. It's like, how do we start creating that? And I think it's a multifaceted approach to solve it. Right. And it's like, that's why we do like educational tours. We do like, we have like our affordable housing, and we try to educate people. And anyway, the properties that we acquire are key. And so one thing I can speak of is that we're planning now. So the vision and action plan that we put in place was through 2020. And we're now thinking to put a plan through 2030. So listen to the neighborhood, what's happening. And then if we need to acquire 20% more of buildings and have more affordability, then if that's what we're listening, then we will probably proactively act towards that. So how do you have always that kind of like ear on the ground and make sure that you're not imposing, but you're actually listening and reacting, and hopefully proactively working with the community towards those achievements. So it is a fine line, and we're aware of it, and it's tricky, it's complicated.
Connie, did you have a question? I didn't see your hand raised, but I don't want to skip you just in case.
Yeah, I put it in the comments on the side.
Oh.
It may have already been answered. Hi, David. When you're designing your portfolio, how do you determine whether or not you're going to use color pictures or black and whites? Does it depend on the project you're working on?
Yeah, I think how important is the picture, right? It's always asking like, what is the message that you're trying to convey? And if the picture is very important, like, then put it as in color picture. You know, I think if it's maybe you're blowing up a, you know, if let's say I show you like the proposals of this artist, they're selling the art, they're selling the picture, so you want to have that prominent. If you're an architect and you want to sell the design of your building, you probably want that picture in color. If it's more like when I was showing on the portfolio that I created, if it's more like a background picture where I was highlighting the year, then maybe the picture is not that important. You know, you're just highlighting the year or like a new section, so that's just a backdrop. You can even use transparency a lot. That always helps with hierarchy as well, where you might leave it in color, but then you add transparency to it, and then that becomes kind of like the background or like a backdrop.
Thank you.
We have a question that came in the chat. How do you view the COVID affecting the creation of communal spaces and instilling a sense of community?
Yeah, that's like $1 million question. I think we're all struggling with that, you know, and walking that fine line of what is safe, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, how much do you push the community to be out there, and then how do you do it safe, right? So there are some examples of what we have done. For example, we just started like an ambassador program. I cannot speak on, like, I don't manage this program, but I'm speaking on behalf of the organization, where we activated 5 to 7 ambassadors within the community that do weekly wellness calls about how people are doing and stuff like that. We send care packages to people's home that include like educational activities for kids. So for example, we partnered up with artists where we gave artists $1,000, and then they had to come up with either an educational poster about COVID or an educational activity for kids that creates awareness about and mental health, helps with mental health. And then we send like 400 of them to like our residents. But in terms of coming into public spaces, we're actually being very, very conservative about it, because we just don't want to promote being out there. If people feel like they want to be safe and being there, but like we cancel all public events, and there is a mental cost that I think we're all suffering, myself included, right? Like, I mean, I think this is something that is so unique that to draw the line about how you build that public space comfortable. I mean, we have our safety guidelines and stuff like that, but any public event that we have out there, we have canceled, because we just don't want to hear that, you know, like all of a sudden imagine you were the hotspot. Oh my God. Like, I think when we look at that, we're like, we're not doing it. So we'll see. I don't know. There's a second wave coming, I believe, and it's tough. That's $1 million question. I know that there are other like online methods, like a lot of people are going online, but then it's the inequality part, right? Where a lot of low-income neighborhoods don't have access to internet, or they don't have access to iPads or laptops. So then the inequality becomes bigger, and then how do you really tackle that? And we actually have 3 applications to foundations to see if we can provide Wi-Fi across our entire portfolio in the neighborhood for free. So installing antennas and then just paying like one account and then just distributing, because we talked to the Salem public schools, and then you can see the whole of inequality right there. Like the majority of kids that don't have access to online education, it's in the neighborhood. And this pandemic is just emphasizing that inequality, unfortunately. It's very tough.
Yeah, it is, and it doesn't seem like it's going to let up anytime soon, which is unfortunate. But I guess it lends time for people to try and be more creative and come up with maybe some different solutions.
Yep.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. Anything coming up in the chat? Well, I guess, thank you, David. That was fabulous. That was very, very insightful, and I think very helpful for everybody.
Well, thank you for hosting me. I appreciate it. I hope this was helpful. I will share also I didn't get to share because I didn't step, but my email, I can follow those links to you, Andrea. And then, yeah, feel free to reach out. I know some of you, so I'll definitely see you guys next spring. And yeah, it was delightful to be here. Thank you, Mara, for hosting me too.
Thank you so much, David. I just want to say that if you guys like this event, and particularly the way David sort of presented it, please do send us the completed survey. It's a 1-line survey. It has lots of nice pictures. There you go for visual. communication. David, thank you again so much. This was so much more than we bargained for, because I think you've been able to bring sort of life, passion, communication, work, tangible ways of, connecting. So now you know the standards I expect from everybody's presentation.
And please visit, when you visit Salem, do it safely, but visit the Punto Runner Museum and feel free to reach out. And I mean, hopefully when we open the office, I'll be happy to give like tours and show around the office, which is full of art as well. But when we will come out better than before, we hope.
Oh, absolutely. By the way, David, believe it or not, we had somebody from BU Communications join us in the middle, and they actually want they want to talk to me to connect with you, because there are some projects similar to what you're doing that they're looking for in, I think, the Boston Harbor or something like that. So anyway, I will talk.
Oh, I would love to. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you guys have a great evening. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody. See you in 15 minutes.